got to Frankfurt because I met Ellen Glasgow and she lived in St. Louis. We were artists represented by the same gallery in the St. Louis area, and we became friends. When Ellen and Celie opened Capitol Gallery, I was here a few years back with 3 other artists from St. Louis who were friends. And I fell in love with the city. I just think it's adorable. And the old homes are fascinating. I'm from Chicago originally. I've lived in St. Louis for almost 11 years. And I've been teaching art and working as a professional artist for about 30 years now. I still teach part-time, and I write art reviews and art articles, feature articles about artists, 2 of whom are Kentucky people, Ellen Glasgow and Jim Cantrell from Bardstown. I've written for American Artist magazine for 3 years, almost 4 now. I've always been influenced since I was a child by something I can't really explain. I've always been very attracted to Oriental art and Oriental people. And it sort of was a, what's the word I want? It was like foretelling the future because my husband and I adopted a Chinese daughter. Our daughter is Chinese. Our son is also adopted, but he is Irish and German extraction. In '81, for a birthday present, my husband fulfilled a dream of mine by sending me to China. And it inspired me to do a lot more Oriental work. And although a lot of the things here are Japanese influenced, I find that there's a lot of similarity. Well, you will find in this particular show a lot of paintings with playing cards in them. And they were influenced by a set of cards. My husband collects games, especially games that have to do with cards. So I found a deck of cards. They happen to be in California, not in the Orient, but I loved them. And I have had them around for a while and decided that they would be good as still life material. And so several of the pieces in the show are paintings done inspired by those cards. However, I want to stress that I don't set up still lifes as other artists do. I draw directly on my surface that I'm going to paint on from my head. I draw from my head. If I need something to look at, perhaps in a plate, in some of the still lifes, there's a very intricate pattern in the china pieces, or a pattern of a wallpaper that may be exact, that I want to get exact. I'll just take the piece to my drawing table and work from it one piece at a time. My lighting is never constant. I make it up as I go along. That way, not getting a photographic image because I don't want it.
Where do your images come from? You say that they come from your head. You
Well,
have the whole thing in your mind? When you
No. Made rag paper. A gal named Betty Kincannon in St. Louis does beautiful papers, and I find it sort of a challenge to work on an absorbent surface like this. But it's kind of fun. The other papers on the larger pieces are a Strathmore board, a pure rag board, with a very slippery Bristol surface. Bothers my kids that I always knew what I wanted to do because they're still floundering at 26 and 22, not sure what they're going to do. But from the time I was about 5, when I started studying at the Art Institute of Chicago, I knew that somewhere in art was where I'd wind up. My mother had had somewhat of an art background and had done commercial work before she was married, and when I was 3 and started painting on the walls, she thought it was a good time to send me to art school. I went for a few weeks and I came home very disgusted at 5. And she said, "What's the matter?" I said, "I don't want to go back there." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Because they think everything's beautiful. They put it up on the board and say it's wonderful, and they don't teach me anything." And I said, "You give me more instruction than they do." So it wasn't until I was 11 then that I went back to Ray Vogue School in Chicago, and I studied dress design and fashion illustration because I loved paper dolls, you know, but it was a good background. And then from then on I studied with private teachers until I got to college. I've always been a closet poet. Nobody ever sees what I write. And fascinated with English. And I got to St. Louis, and I had been, in Chicago I'd also been very concerned about the fact that the West Coast and the East Coast got the most press when it came to art. And when I moved to St. Louis, I found so many Midwestern people there working and doing such beautiful work that wasn't being acknowledged that I decided, why not? I mean, hey, I'm an old lady, I don't care what people think. I wrote to the publisher of American Artist magazine and I said, what does one have to do to get noticed in the Midwest? And I wasn't speaking for myself, I really was speaking for the artists I had found there. And he wrote me a lovely letter back and said, well, we were always interested in seeing work. Send a note to the editor, he's in charge. So I did. And they told me, send slides of people's work that you like, and we'll be glad to take a look at it, slides and resume, and send us your published written work. Whoops, don't have anything published, what am I going to do? And one of the people who they had accepted slides of right away was Kent Addison, who is my friend and teacher in St. Louis, a wonderful watercolorist and sculptor. And he said to me, why don't we do a package for him? Why don't you do the article and send it in as a package, and they either like it or they don't like it, let's do it, which was very kind of him. They loved it, and I've been writing for them ever since. Since December of '84, I've done 28 articles for them, some special articles too, and helped them with their seminar in St. Louis. There is a show there now, the American Artist Competition Show is on exhibit at the St. Louis Artists Guild. So I've tried really hard to promote artists in the Midwest, and most of them are really pleased with the responses that they've received through the magazine.
Do you find it as easy to write as it is for you to paint?
Mm-hmm. I don't know how good it is, how well I do, but I enjoy it. It's very quick for me. It's much quicker than my paintings, which take me many hours. A lot of my work is very detailed, as you can see from the show, and some of them are several hundred hours for me to do. It's a very painstaking, not painstaking for me because I love detail, but it is a time-consuming art, the way I do it. And the writing is sort of a respite from it because it goes very quickly. I remember a cute anecdote, if I may. The first article on Kent's, I made about 8 drafts of that article, fearful that it would, it had to be perfect. And just when it was finished, I let my husband read it through because he's very good with words, and he said, oh, my Lord, you write like you talk. You don't stop, you don't breathe, you don't put a period in. We've got to assume that people won't follow what you've written. We've got to shorten it, clip it, shorten it, make it simple. So I did what he said, and I chopped it up a bit, shorter sentences. When I got it back from the associate editor there at American Artist, she called me. She said, I'm sending you a galley sheet of the final piece because I didn't want you to be upset. I want to be sure that it still sounds like you to you, but I have done some changing. She took all the periods out and ran all the sentences together, so Norm never gets to see anything anymore. So, but it is fun. I enjoy it a lot. Who ask, that people that ask me questions about, how do you know it's good? Should I buy it? Art is a very personal thing. Your reaction to art is a gut reaction usually. Don't think about what somebody else thinks about it. You either like it or you don't like it. And as far as purchasing art, it's just like, it's a luxury, but it's a necessity too. And if you like it well enough and you can afford to buy it, do it. It's something that makes your environment better. And I advise people to go to museums and expose themselves to gallery work and to absorb as much as they can about it. And my students are really learning to see, because that's what I teach. it's really a drawing and learning to use media, but in reality, it's how they use their eyes. Really observing things is what's important. And anyone can draw. Anyone can draw. And it's a matter of being able to see things.
This particular show is limited to 2 series of works. The triangular teapots, teacups, and tea trays, and a series that I call kimono baskets. The kimono baskets are inspired by my love of fiber, of fabric, and I have come to get very involved in using color as well as very rich texture on my surfaces. And you have to remember where I come from. I graduated from college in 1961 with a degree in sculpture that focused on Renaissance sculpture, traditional figurative sculpture. And when you did form, it was form for the sake of form, and you didn't put any color on the form other than a patina that would accent the surface. When I put color on my surfaces, the color might even alter that form so that you're deceived into thinking that it's bending in a certain way when it's really not. So what I'm doing is contradictory to the way I was educated. The kimono baskets are also dealing with another thing that I use in my figurative sculpture, which I don't have here, which is using soft folds of clay so that it bends and occupies the space in a very moving, so that it looks like it's constantly moving. Even the handles vault into space and look like they're soaring or moving. And that's a very important part of my work, because I want to set up the tension of having it look soft, look like it's moving, but it's really a fixed object. It's not moving. And the triangular teacups and tea trays are taking the highly textured surface that I'm involved in now and marching it around that triangular surface. And now I'm experimenting with a lot of high, rich color on those triangular teapots. But they're really kind of physical examples of my quirky sense of humor, because I kind of think of them as creatures that walk around in the gallery at night talking to one another. They talk teapot language. They go, and the little teacups move in my imagination. It's just the way I've made them. If you want to take the teapots very seriously, you can. You're welcome to. They allude directly to geometric Oriental forms. They really do. There is really nothing new under the sun. That's something that you'll probably hear every potter that you've ever met, every sculptor that you've ever met will say that. There is nothing new under the sun. And since I am an Orientophile, I love things that are Oriental. I probably have visually consumed thousands and thousands of pieces of Oriental works, not just from Japan or China, but from the Middle East. Everything that I could lay my hands on to see if it was in a museum or in a book, I consumed it. So some of the feet that are on my pots, they may have been on an ancient work, you never know, but they're interpreted my way using my particular markings, because one thing I've learned over the years, nobody makes a mark in clay like anybody else. It's like a fingerprint. My fingerprint is uniquely my own. The marks that I make on my clay and the way I make those marks are my own. I think that's why I don't get upset when somebody says, are you willing to teach this to somebody else? Are you willing to share that information with somebody else? Sure I am. It's like sharing a recipe. I'll cook it my way, and you'll take the same information, but you're going to cook it your way. Because the clay tells us what to do. It tells me that I can only move in a certain way. When I make walls out of the clay, like the walls of the teapot, the triangular forms, they can only be held up a certain way. And I'm always pushing, though. I'm always pushing. I want to push it to the very edge to see, what can I get away with? how far can I push this clay? You'll see it in some of the basket work. And in fact, everything that I make, yes, I know there are oils on people's skin, but everything that I make is for touching. You only go around once in this life, and I don't even mind if children are carefully supervised by the parents. Let them touch that surface. Maybe that's a future potter coming along. Maybe that's a future sculptor. Let them touch the surface, because we're not one-dimensional people. We learn not just from looking, but from feeling, from touching. I began sculpting with 2 pieces of rock taken from my gravel driveway between my short little stubby legs when I was 8 years old. And I got the worst leg bruise from that because I didn't know how to really flake with the rock. And I was always getting into mud, putting things together, getting involved with mechanical things, putting them together, taking them apart. My father was incredibly awful. He'd always say, I can do that, I can put that back together, and I'd sneak in behind him, and I'd be a little smarty 10-year-old, and I'd put it together lickety-split because it made sense in my head. It wasn't until I went to college, after taking 4 years of high school art, and with very good guidance, I must say, very good guidance. I went to Narings Hall High School in St. Louis, Missouri, and I had some superb teachers, superb. Among them, Ann Torini and Sister Gabriel Mary Hoare, who are very fine artists themselves today. And it wasn't until I got into college that I realized, and I ended up in Ann's present husband's class, Rudy Torini, and I was thinking always, all of my life, I was thinking in 3-dimension. I think it's kind of related to when I got my first pair of glasses when I was 13, and I put those puppies on my face, and I said to my dad, my gosh, there's bricks on that wall. I've never seen those all my life until I was 13. I didn't have glasses. So I thought everybody saw fuzzy. So ever since then, you know, I'm real careful. I love my glasses. I love my contact lenses. I take good care of my eyes. But here I am in Rudy Torini's class. I'm in that sculpture class, and I have a hunk of wet clay in my hands. And I'm putting it on an armature. And you know those light bulbs that they talk about going off in your brain? That light bulb went off. And I was hooked for life. That was it. There was no doubt in my mind that sculpture was where I belonged. And evidently, looking back on it, both as a teacher and as a parent, I look back on it and I see I must have been looking that way all my life, seeing things that way. It's not something that I set out to do. It's something that happened to me. It was a precious gift. When I was raised and educated, I'll tell you what I was told in classroom, in college, in a woman's college. I don't know why I'm teaching you this. You're going to become barefoot and pregnant. This is going to be a waste of time. So those are the kinds of ideas that were planted in our heads and supported in general by all of society. So I'm raising my children always craving art, always wanting to be occupied in it. I did crafts, I did teaching on the side, taught little kids, had little kids classes in the home. And I would be dragging my children to the art museum, and they'd say, oh, Mom, can't we go to the zoo? At least there's something to look at there. But here, what is this stuff? Now they're 22, 20, and 16. Where are they going? The museum. Except they're going into a different spectrum. I'm married to a contemporary designer. He's a contract designer. And our home is eclectic. It's filled with antiques, and at the same time it's filled with ultra-contemporary furniture and contemporary and traditional art. Most of the art that we own is art that's been done by very close friends of ours, including Betsy. And so they've grown up with a more contemporary dimension to live in. And in fact, because their father is a contract designer, they're very well educated in that slicker, ultra contemporary look, and that's not what they want in their own life. They're starting way back in square one. They don't have my art background, so they're going back to more ultra-traditional forms in their life. They're coming to it in a different way.
You came back to art. What recommendation do you have for women who are still in the middle of that struggle of raising children and knowing they want to do art? And
I have two recommendations. One is follow the example of some of the wonderful young women that I'm meeting today, and that is if you can find a way to pay for a babysitter, even if it's only 1 day a week, where you take your child to that babysitter and you do your art that 1 day a week, do it, because you have to exercise your artistic muscle. And we're talking about your soul, which is your life. Do that. The other thing is, if you feel you need more education in your craft, and I did, I went back to school in 1979, even though I already had an art degree. I wanted to specialize in pottery. I wanted to learn how to throw on the wheel. I thought, oh, I could get a high school job, a job as a high school teacher. And as I always joke, I say, it's like Gypsy Rose Lee gave the advice. If you're going to bump it with a trumpet. I walk into that high school principal and say, hey, I am specialized in ceramics. You need me. They'd hire me. I didn't count on getting so hooked on it that I had to make it a career and not make teaching not a career. It's a career that I still respect, I admire, but it's not a career that I'm as interested in as being a full-time sculptor. But when I started back, and I want to caution anybody, young or old, going back to school, expect to be afraid. Understand that you will probably be afraid. And you're probably going to be no less afraid than freshmen just straight out of high school going back to school. You will have to relearn how to study again, but you've got a great asset that they don't have. You've been seeing for all those years, all the time it's been since you last entered school. They really are not strong observers. They're probably good observers, but they're not strong observers the way you are. And give yourself credit for what you've been doing. If you've been managing a household with children, remember the word is management. You have been managing. That is a very great skill. And if you can manage 3 kids like I managed 3 kids, why they, you can do just about anything in this world. There is no more difficult job in the world, no more complex job in the world than raising children and managing their lives and supporting them. It's time for you to support yourself. Give yourself that same management. Give yourself that same support. And don't try and be perfect. Walk in that class and say, hey, I'm going to experiment. I'm going to do this and do the best I can, but it does not have to be perfect. Now, that's probably the most important lesson that I think every artist should have, because every work, in truth, is really an experiment. As I said before, I work in series. It's the best way for a sculptor or a ceramist to work in a body of work, because then you're working out this, let's say, the kimono basket problem. You identify what the problem is that you want to solve, that you want to work on. How am I going to address the clay? How am I going to work the handles? In this exhibit, there are 2 pieces that show a new transitional handle that is taking me off in a new direction. The handle itself is changing the form.
those aren't something that you just went to an import store and bought?
None of these handles are from an import store. Every single handle is made by me. And
so that's basket making as well, right?
I would say so, but I can tell you this. Jerry Ao was my teacher at Merrimack. She's an incredible Chinese Hawaiian ceramist. And she does mixed media. And I can remember coming to her and saying, how am I going to make a teapot handle? And she said, don't worry about it. Get the materials that you think it ought to be made out of. So I did. And she said, the material will tell you itself how the handle should be made. And I know that sounds like a non-answer, but she's right. I did know enough to ask a basket maker, well, what do I do with this stuff, this round reed and this cane? And the basket maker said, soak it in water, then it becomes pliable. Then you can start inserting it in the, you have to remember, I have to start when that clay is wet. I have to have holes in that wet clay ready to receive the basket making materials that make that handle, and I have to be able to gamble with this clay. This is low fire clay. I have to be able to gamble that the tension that I put on those handles is not going to break my clay. Well, it hasn't yet, so I evidently must have known instinctively from the beginning how to at least make a basic handle, and then I went on from there.
I'm interested in some of the little details that you put in the handle. The one right next to you has a little fan shape in it, and then a feather and another one.
It's almost
The
like a
little-
fetish, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's there because I go by my gut. All of my work is my best work, and this is my best work. All of my work is by my gut. My gut said it needed a cropped feather here in order to complete this form, because it looks fine. You'll see some other baskets here that have this handle, this particular type of handle on it, and where the handles intersect, that V is a pure, wonderful form, and the way I always add pieces into the top surface of the handle. I always like the eye to have something delicious to look at. I like to enrich it and add extra special little things so that you can travel around and say, oh, I didn't see that before. Oh. But in this case, I wanted to obstruct that V. So that also tells you to do something else. You've got to go around the basket to look behind and see what's behind the V. That's Oriental too, because you'll also notice, for example, on this basket, I pay attention to putting the color and the pattern underneath the form. Just think about some of the wonderful Oriental cabinets that you've seen. You open the door, and there's a little tiny drawer, and you pull the drawer out, and what's inside the drawer? Wonderful pattern paper. Or if it's exquisite woods, they put a special polish on the inside. They don't leave it unfinished. It's attention to detail. It's a kind of a seductive way of saying, okay, viewer, come with me. Pick this piece up. Look underneath. Is there something to look at underneath? Well, by golly, there sure is.